Good morning. I'm here this morning. I'm Senator Steve Sodders. My district is Marshall and Tama County, and I'm here to talk about a bill that we will have to establish a new home for troubled youth. It will have some major reforms in this bill, and our focus is on restructuring, refocusing on an accredited Iowa Juvenile Home. And what we've attempted to do is take many to all of the governor's task force recommendations are incorporated into this bill so that we do have a place in the state for these troubled youth.
Thanks. We're hearing from juvenile court officers and from social workers who protect Iowa's children all across the state that there is a need for this facility and that we need to be caring for Iowa's most troubled youth here in our state.
The responsibility of our budget subcommittee is to fund the juvenile home. There's been a recommendation by the governor to close the juvenile home and fund it through private providers. Our subcommittee will be struggling with this question in a bipartisan way. We hope to resolve the funding for juvenile delinquents and CINA girls to get fair and equal treatment in the state. And we'll be doing this in tandem with the bill that Senator Sodders will be releasing today.
Are there any questions?
What's the bill number?
We don't have the bill number yet. It should be coming down shortly.
Has been signed in the process.
Can you have a summary of the bill in front of you, or we have it here?
And this would be reopening the facility in Toledo?
It's not a reopening. We're starting from scratch. We realized that there were issues and troubles at this facility in the last 3 years particularly, and so what we're trying to do is this is going to be a new facility, a new concept, and we're trying to get to a way to help these troubled youth and make them productive citizens of Iowa.
In Toledo?
That's particularly where we have it in the bill, yes, because we have the facility now. But it will be run differently, and we have different things in the bill that, again, the task force, the governor's own task force recommended.
So is it a new facility, or you're going to use the other?
Well, the building will be there, right? We have a building that's now empty, but so we're hoping to use that facility, so we're not building a new facility at taxpayer expense. We have a facility for these youth. But I think the structure and what we're trying to get to is making it a better place for these youth from what it was.
We're not building a new building.
Correct.
We are establishing a new
program. Okay,
program.
gotcha. New programs.
So is it program stuff, or is it like fixing up the building? Because that already got remodeled and stuff. Is it more just how you treat the kids there?
Correct. Yeah, it's more about the workings, how it should be managed. Getting some accreditation in there from outside groups, which is one of the task force recommendations, so more oversight so that there are more eyes on the place to make sure that the kids are being treated and taken care of well in the state. And I think we all want that.
I'd like to be remembered that there was no recommendation by the task force or anybody to close the facility. There was a recommendation to move the boys to Eldora, so you separate the girls from the boys. Only the governor recommended and proceeded with closing the facility. But I think every one of us realizes that there has to be changes, that there were procedures that were not followed, there was training that was not provided, there was leadership that was not there, and as a result, girls who were in a safe place, even though their treatment was being questioned, they were in a safe place and now have been dispersed. And the quality of those varied services are unknown to us. We do not know whether or not these girls are getting any kind of real treatment right now. So it's a sense of urgency on the part of the legislature to be included in this public policy decision of how we treat girls and how children in this state are receiving services. These children are our guardians. These children are our responsibilities. And the legislature in the past has taken and gone to great lengths to try to provide and the children to receive the best services possible. And so this is our answer to being included in this discussion. And the governor did not include us, but now in a bipartisan way, with this bill and being introduced in the Senate, and the discussion toward the budget in a bipartisan Budget Committee of the House and Senate, we think we'll get down to some of the answers that should have been provided to the citizens of the state a lot earlier.
Since the governor closed this facility, what makes you think he'll sign on to reopening and funding this?
We haven't had a discussion with the governor because he's never invited us to have a discussion, and so our way is through legislation and the budget. The budget is a way of identifying priorities. The priorities of this legislature, Republican and Democrat, Senate and House, has always been to protect children. And there is clear evidence that these children it's questioned whether or not they have received the treatment they needed while they were there and right now.
And I think with this legislation, you're going to find we're giving the governor the opportunity to take on what his own task force told him needed to be done. We put all those things in this bill, so I think we actually give the governor an opportunity to sign on to a new facility and do what's right with these kids.
Do you have any ballpark about additional funding-wise you would need to accomplish what you had versus how it was funded before?
Right off the bat, I think one of the major things in the bill and one of the things that the task force and DRI came up with was the education portion. It was under DHS. Under this bill, it'll either be through the AEA or the local school district, and then in that case, we need to make sure we're funding enough for that education. I don't know what a number would be, but you're probably talking $4 or $5 million maybe to have the education. And that's something that I think the Budget Committee and folks and the education folks will all talk about. But I think that was a good change because it puts their education back under Department of Education where it probably should have been in the first place. And that's why I think taking these recommendations was the right thing to do.
That's a startup fee, 4 or 5 cost, or?
I don't know yet.
Okay.
I think that's part of what's got to happen into the Budget Committee, both into the education budget and Health and Human Services budget.
You don't have a total
Does the building need
cost
any
estimate?
significant upgrades in terms of the budget, in terms of for the new program, or can you just kind of go in and?
Well, you remember that we put in almost $8 million in a new building there that provided vocational training and education. Half the cottages have been renovated already. It's really the question of how you use the existing facility, how many girls will be there. Part of the proposal is an assessment center, so that now judges will be able to have a real assessment based on standards that are nationally established on where we can actually place these girls and boys. So we're creating a new assessment center so that the judges will have a better opportunity other than just recommendations from a caseworker on the best placement for girls and boys. That's a really intriguing part of this bill that is new. We kind of gleaned that from the task force report and from other reports that we've had, saying that there was a real lack of legitimate, thorough assessment for these kids.
When was that $8 million spent on the facility?
4 or 5 years ago.
And will the former employees have to reapply for their jobs? I mean, are they going to be guaranteed something, or do they simply have to go back through the process? And
The governor unilaterally closed and laid off those workers. So if there's any reopening, there will be new employees.
okay,
We don't know exactly the size of this of the program, both in terms of the available pool for girls and the type of employees we will need. But I think that most people believe that this system of child care, of children's care under our guardianship, there is a need of a state facility. And I think other groups have said that.
Would former employees be considered for new positions?
Sure, everybody would. Depending on, I think there's an issue now of whether or not they're closing the facility or they're being laid off. So those issues really are not any concern of ours right now. We want to make sure there's a safe haven and a good facility for young women.
Do you know what the total cost of this package would be, and would you redirect money in the current budget that was earmarked for?
That was what Dave asked for, basically, is the cost of this full system. That's what our budget will be looking at. Absolutely. The committee will work through that, and we like it in the budget committee because there we have House members, Senate members, Republicans, and Democrats trying to come up with a solution outside the politicking that goes on between chambers. And actually, this is one of the things that I think our leaders kind of use as an example of how senators and representatives work on issues, and leaders of both parties and both chambers will try to facilitate our work. And so that's going to be part of it.
This will be a girls-only facility?
It will be a girls-only facility except for the assessment part, which will be for boys and girls. And that assessment, again, could be there on campus, or it could be outside. It could be used a lot of different ways.
And that assessment concept that comes from the task force?
There was mention, I can't tell you for sure whether or not they did talk about that there was a lack of assessment. And so when we put our heads together over the several years, we've always had a strong assessment in areas of healthcare, mental health. And so we thought this would be a perfect place where these girls have been, they've been denied placement in up to 6 and 7 other placements. So we wanted to make sure that instead of having the system keep on rejecting them, we would have a place that they would be assessed first. So the judge, and there are dozens of judges that make these assignments, will have better tools to determine what is the best treatment. So we think it's a great idea.
I apologize if this has already been made clear, but what's that $4 to $5 million for?
Well,
$5 million for?
that would be, because we're taking the education out of Department of Human Services, which is where the education was done in the old facility. If we then take that, put that under Department of Ed, typically there's classrooms on the facility. You would probably have to contract and bring teachers in to teach on the facility. There's those types of things. So, and that's a real ballpark number. It could be less, but trying to get to how do we get Department of Ed, either if it's South Tama school districts, if it's AEA, we need to make sure that we have educators on the facility to be able to teach the kids.
Again, those are issues that over the coming weeks, the legislature will work through.
And on education, these young women, and some of them are 13 years old, some of them are 17 and 18. They're girls becoming adolescents into adulthood, have had a variety of difficult behavioral problems. And so sometimes being in a classroom is not the learning experience that they can actually succeed in. And so the juvenile home for a long period of time provided individual educational care. It did not always lead to graduation. And I think that there's an agreement that we as a state need to continue to facilitate that. And that will mean that if they leave the juvenile home, there's still a state responsibility to continue to get them to have a GED or a high school diploma. So that's what I believe the task force report was talking about. That's what our committee internally has been talking about. So we don't know the cost of that. We're bringing in, I think the bill talks about the AEA as special education, as TAMA, a school district as a source. So there's a variety of educational needs that these kids need, and that's why just dispersing them, as DHS did when they closed the facility without knowing how we're going to provide educational, vocational, and mental health and behavioral treatment, was a great disservice to those kids. That's not going to continue. That is not going to continue.
Do you have a vision for when this might actually come to pass, reopening that place?
As the facility is there, it just takes political will, and it takes leadership. And we could do it as soon as, and when if this bill gets passed and signed, we would make sure that the governor would have the authority to act immediately upon signature.
So, Jack, why do you think that Branson is going to sign this?
Well, we haven't talked to him. I think it's reasonable. I think it's going to be a bipartisan approach. I think that if he had involved the legislature earlier, we would be going through these kinds of discussions and build support. We have a community up in arms. We have children that are displaced, and we don't know the quality of their care. DHS doesn't either. I think that as long as we work toward fixing the problems and not just moving them, I think reasonable politicians will be excited about this process. And I think it's a bipartisan bill. There's a state representative who will be submitting this in the House, so we'll be getting this going. And our budget subcommittee is excited about it. We have to deal with this issue. It's not going to be an issue that will go away. We are going to appropriate money that will protect children and protect these girls in some sort of new program. And this is our proposal.
Do you have any concerns about the girls themselves? Obviously, they're already dealing with issues, but they've been moved out once before, and now you're talking about wherever the heck they are, moving them back. Is that tough on them to do all this moving around?
Yeah.
Here's social worker.
Well, obviously, the more times that a child is placed out of their home environment and goes through these types of things, it's simply not good for them. And that's why this decision to close the facility before we had worked out the kinds of placement that these children need, that decision was done backward from how it should have been done.
At the same time, the explanation given by the governor, the DHS, everybody involved in that, was this all was done in the best interest of those girls.
You're asking me if I believe that it was done in the best interest of the girls. The motives for that, you'll have to talk to Governor Branstad about and why he made that decision. None of us here are saying that there weren't problems at the juvenile facility. And all of us here are adamant about protecting Iowa's children. And that's why this bill is being rolled out that will do a better job of providing these services. But we believe very firmly that there has to be a facility like a juvenile facility for children who have very serious problems. We have to have that kind of placement available in our state, and we have to have the accreditation and the supports in place for that type of facility so that our children are treated best and follow the belief that Iowa's children are best treated by Iowans.
There's been quite a bit of concern expressed about the welfare of the girls who were moved out. Some of them back to their own homes with
Yes.
obvious dangers involved.
Yes.
In detention and so on. Is there anything the legislature can do about that?
Well, we're trying to get as much information, and some of the health information prohibits us, so we get some of that kind of piecemeal, and clearly we're looking at that. Iowa's children need to have access to education. They need to have access to the appropriate level of care that they need. And again, that's why I just think it is egregious to have made the decision to close the facility before having those things in place first.
A third of these kids went home. If they were really ready to go home, why haven't they gone home before? A third of the kids at this facility went home. Another 10 are in either detention or shelter care where they're not getting education and they're not getting treatment. So we believe up to 1/2 of these kids have been moved to placements that 2 months ago were deemed to be inappropriate. Before this facility closed, those were deemed to be inappropriate. Up to 1/2 of these kids, we believe, have been put in situations that are not in their best interest. And clearly the juvenile court officers in the state have recommended we have a facility for kids that have failed in 6 to 10 other placements, that we need a facility for that. So, yeah, I think we're very concerned about what's happened to these other kids.
So really all the legislature can do is just get the place reopened as fast as possible?
I think
To
that's the
establish
most important.
to establish a new place.
program in an old facility.
Well, I think it's important, and we've asked this question, I think it's been over a week, maybe even 2 weeks now, we've asked the Department of Human Services for a follow-up on all of the children that were sent home and the children were sent to different placements. And we're not arguing that some of the placements were probably okay. We have Four Oaks, we have other places that handle these type of kids all the time, and so we're not talking about those kids. But the 14 or so that were sent home, I'm a law enforcement officer. I've already heard from folks back in my area that some of them have already ran away. And if they're, are they still on the run? Where are they at? Governor, where are these kids? And we can't even get, it's been 2 weeks and we can't get an answer from either the governor's office or DHS on the status of most of these kids. Now the ones that are at Four Oaks and the ones that are at those kind of facilities, they're there. But the ones they sent home and some of these other things, I'm the senator for the area. I have no clue where or how these kids are doing. And we've asked for that.